All right, welcome everyone. Can you hear me off this microphone?
Exactly.
Excellent.
With your new hip. Show it off. Yeah.
So welcome to Baby Steps, the pro-life success story. And I'm about to introduce a very distinguished panel that has been leading the way for a lot of our pro-life success in this country. And they are in the trenches every day. They're brilliant when it comes to strategy and policy and what needs to be done as we fight this important cause that has been already talked about by many of the candidates that have joined us here on the stage in the main ballroom. So I want to give them an opportunity, for you an opportunity to hear from them as much as possible and share their knowledge. And we're going to have a nice productive hour with you to talk about some of the successes, some of the things that have been going on in the pro-life movement, talk about some resources that are available to you that you can take back home to be able to increase your activism on this important cause, and then some of the takeaways and what you can do further with those resources to make an impact back home. So I'm going to start with some introductions first, and I'll start with to my immediate right, and this is Darla St. Martin, and she is the co-executive director of National Right to Life, which was founded in 1968 and is the nation's oldest and largest pro-life organization, with more than 50 state affiliates and more than 3,000 local chapters. Through education, legislation, National Right to Life works to restore legal protection to the most defenseless members of our society who are threatened by abortion, infanticide, assisted suicide, and euthanasia. Next to Darla is Dr. Charmaine Yoest, who is president and CEO of Americans United for Life, and they're the legal architects of our pro-life movement. AUL's legal strategists have been involved in every life-related case before the United States Supreme Court, beginning with Roe versus Wade. AUL is the pioneer of the state-based model legislative strategy, which has increased exponentially with significant victories in the past few years. AUL's legal strategy works both to save the lives of the unborn while also confronting the so-called reliance interest adopted by the Supreme Court in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the false idea that women rely on abortion to succeed in American society. Dr. Yoest began her career in the White House during the Reagan administration, served as a senior advisor for Mike Huckabee's presidential campaign back in '08, worked at the Family Research Council, and lives here in the Washington area with her husband Jack, who's with us today, and her 5 children. So I mean, you know, and let me get through the next guest before we talk about all of our kids. But Marjorie Dannenfelser, sitting next to Charmaine, she's the president and the original organizer of the Susan B. Anthony List, a national pro-life group dedicated to pursuing policies and electing candidates to reduce and ultimately end abortion. Under Marjorie's leadership, SBA List has grown to more than 365,000 members nationwide. Since its founding, SBA List has helped elect more than 100 pro-life candidates to the U.S. House, 19 to the U.S. Senate, and 16 to other statewide offices in the country. Give some applause for that, because that's a lot of work.
They did next door. That was great.
Prior to founding Susan B. Anthony List, Marjorie served as the staff director for the Congressional Pro-Life Caucus on Capitol Hill. She's also worked at the Heritage Foundation. She lives in Arlington with her wonderful husband and their 5 children, except for you have some at college. So, but you know, so these women are not only leaders in our movement, working full-time, but they have other full-time jobs as the mothers of 5. And so that deserves some applause as well. So. I want to dive right in, and we'll start with Marjorie. We just came out of an election. Abortion was key in several races, several significant races that also led to the Senate turning a more pro-life direction. What worked in some of those races, and what lessons do you see from being involved that were learned that we can share with our activists here that then they can take back home?
How much time should we take? We have
wait, I'll give
Take a few minutes to answer.
couple of minutes.
Yeah, take a couple
Well,
minutes.
let me start.
I don't have a debate clock like they have in the big room.
We're done. Okay, you guys. No, let me just start with the consequence of the election, and I think it's that abortion-centered feminism is dead. I really believe that's true. Now, it certainly could crawl back in the crevices of new elections and new conversations and new legislative battles. However, if we stay on the track that we're on, we will continue into the next election against Hillary Clinton potentially with a very strong, emboldened, pro-life, pro-woman force on the not just Republican side, but in the Hispanic community and among moderate Democrats. I think what worked was, and I will be interested in hearing what the other panelists say, what worked was being very focused on a definite set of voters who already agree with us, who are registered to vote but aren't voting enough, are often not voting in midterm elections, taking to them door to door, almost 500,000 doors for Susan B. Anthony list, a message that is a common ground message. Number one, passing the pain-capable 20-week bill on the federal level, making that a litmus test for Senate candidates. And number two, taxpayer funding of abortion. What we saw was pro-abortion Democrat candidates backing away from the abortion issue, and our candidates going on the offense for the first time in a very long time. So I say that posture of leaning forward must continue, and that's what we plan to do, and I know you guys plan to do the same thing.
Yeah, Charmaine, why don't you jump in there?
Well, first off, I just want to, talking about pro-life and winning and building momentum and seeing, restoring a culture of life in America, I'm encouraged just by looking around this room. And I want to thank each one of you for voting with your feet, by being here today to tell CPAC and to really, the broader culture that this is an important issue that we want to spend time thinking about and strategizing on. This is really, really essential as we move into 2016, and particularly, as Marjorie has said, as we confront the possibility of a Hillary Clinton candidacy, which, make no mistake, will be very firmly centered around these issues about what it means to be a powerful woman in our culture today, where abortion figures in the constellation of issues related to women. And so where I see us really making progress is, you'll have to bear with me. I grew up, part of my youth was in Kentucky, and we had a saying in Kentucky that if you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yelps is the one that got hit. Well, if you watch to see what's going on in the media, the left-wing media, and kind of, if you want, the feminist old girl network, we're starting to see an increasing yelping over the idea that abortion is something that is good for women. The other day I was scrolling through my Instagram feed, and I follow Planned Parenthood pretty closely, as I'm sure many of you do. And they had a slide that talked about how safe abortion is. How safe abortion is. Well, why is Planned Parenthood putting out and aggressively moving on this theme? The reason is because we're getting traction with them on this idea, this actual truth that abortion harms women. Abortion is not good for women. It is the road to empowerment for women doesn't need to involve abortion. As wives, as mothers, as sisters, as friends, there's so much more that makes a powerful woman in our culture today than the reductionist idea that the feminists put forward of quote-unquote reproductive freedom. What they are promoting is reproductive bondage, and the more that we're able to equip candidates to talk in the field with confidence, with absolute confidence about our issue, the more we're able to gain ground and to continue the momentum that we're seeing. And I'll close with this thought. Part of what we are seeing is, yes, we're seeing candidates win. We are also seeing dramatic gains at the state level in state-based legislation. AUL alone was involved over the last several years in over 70 pieces of pro-life law being enacted across the country. And my colleagues here were involved in more, somewhere north of 200 pro-life laws have been enacted across the country. It's objectively unprecedented. The Guttmacher Institute is absolutely going nuts, talking about how, you know, the sky is falling, that next thing you know, women are going to be, you know, Cinderella in the ash heap as these abortion laws go across the country. But as you're seeing kind of this two-pronged level of success with seeing more pro-life candidates, seeing more pro-life laws enacted at the state level, make no mistake, the pro-life movement is on the upswing, and it's particularly exciting to me when you think about the fact that all of this is happening in the Obama era. When you're on the side of truth, we had to really dig in and keep our eye on the long-term perspective over the last several years as we faced so much opposition at the federal level under this administration. But nevertheless, we've continued to gain ground and to move forward.
Great. Darla, I know you follow all these things as well, and I'd love for your thoughts.
Yes.
For, you know,
our organization looks at each election and studies all the races across the country. In the last election, for example, we focused primarily on the Senate because the Senate was at that time controlled by the Democrats, and we wanted, and unfortunately, there have been fewer and fewer and fewer Democrats until there are practically none now. There were 3 in the last vote in the House. Only 3 Democrats voted for a pro-life bill that was up. So when I say we supported the Republicans, that is because they were pro-life, because they answered our questionnaires pro-life, because they answered our questions when we interviewed them pro-life. So we had a very good, and then we also studied their past records. Now you can study their records yourself on our website, and later I understand from Matt, we're going to be looking at some of the resources, and one of them is our website, and all of us here have excellent websites, but you can see the records of the incumbents. And interestingly enough, more and more, you look at the records on our website, and you look through the different states, and you look at the summary of their record for the session, and it's 100%, 100%, 0, 0, 0, 0, 100%. And all of the Republicans, most all of the Republicans, not all of them, but most of them are pro-life, and most of the Democrats are pro-abortion. So that's a difference too. So party does make a difference. And I was talking to one of the Democrats who was running for the Senate recently, and he said he was going to come to Washington and be a pro-life senator. And I said, okay, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on you against that. And do you think I can't stand up to that pressure? Well, I didn't say that I didn't, because I do feel that Democrats come to Washington and fall in with bad companions, even if they had originally intended to be pro-life. So most of you are probably Republicans, because over the years, when I first got involved in the pro-life movement, there were many, many grassroots pro-life Democrats. And many of them still consider them pro-life. I could give you some figures. There are many, 27% of the Democrats consider themselves pro-life, which is really interesting. So if we can find those 27% and inform them that a different candidate, maybe not the one they're already supporting, is pro-life, that's one of the kinds of things that we were talking about here. Identifying the pro-life people, no matter which party they are, finding them, getting them to the polls to vote for the pro-life candidate. And we know who that is then because we've done a questionnaire, we've done interviews, we've looked at their record. And we also study the polling data from the Senate and the House. And we watch it during the election. And some people use different systems. Some people start out picking out one that they know, or more than one that they know is going to be a key race, and follow it all the way through. Because we're trying to look at all the races, and because pro-lifers don't usually have as much money as Planned Parenthood or some of the wealthy pro-abortionists, or George Soros is not funding them. So as a result, we have to economize with the money we have in our political action committees. So we monitor the races so that we can determine which races are close and which races will mean control of the Senate or the House, and hopefully both. Or if we're talking about the presidency, which, where we have to concentrate our efforts in order to win the presidency. So we study poll data, and so that's one of the ways we figure out, in fact, what races are going to be key in this election.
I want to pick up on something on that real quick. Want to just
go ahead.
Jump in real quick, but
sure.
Something I want to blend something though that each three of you have touched on it, but blend it into
okay.
one question. Marjorie touched on it briefly about some of the messaging about defunding the abortion industry, and I know all three of your organizations are focused on defunding abortion, but and as a way to appeal to voters and bring them our way, and maybe as part of that 27% you just mentioned, Darla, you each have done some research on your own. What is your research telling you about defunding the abortion industry? And then the messaging or the demographics that the activists would want to know about, that inside information that we can start building that army to start fighting this just cruel industry that receives tax money and donations and such like that. But I want to segue into that because that was some effective messaging that was used in some races. But so I don't, Charmaine or Darla, and Marjorie, if you want to go first on that, but
sure.
Jump in on that and tell us what you know that would help the folks here that they might not already know.
One thing that I've learned the hard way sometimes is to not just go with your gut. I mean, we might think an issue works, and we find out that it's only our echo chamber where it works. So before we spend millions of dollars, which we did in this past election, on trying to win a Senate race, we must do due diligence and check with the people who actually live in the state, the types of people that we're trying to target, and see through focus groups and polling how they might be moved. So, for instance, in North Carolina, we did an actual poll of the people, or a sample of the poll that we literally were going to be communicating with, and we found two things. We found that taxpayer funding of abortion was far and away the biggest sell, and that not too far behind, though, even though I said far away, was the pain-capable 20-week bill. I think there's probably a little bit of a gap in those two because there's an education curve. We find that people don't even know it's legal to have an abortion after 20 weeks in our country. There is no federal restriction whatsoever. And so what we want to do is two things. We want them to vote, but we want to come out of the election with a mandate. We want to come out of the election with senators who are planning to go to the U.S. Senate and do something about it. And I believe that that's what we did. So the other piece that I would say is that when we learn that, when we do our research and we find out what our messages are, we also, within the bounds of legality, make sure that we have done everything we can do to make sure the candidates themselves know how to articulate the issue. And again, gut is not enough. My gut is not enough. But actually practicing, reading, articulating the issue in a way that truly reflects your core will mean that you will always be able to pull it out when you need to, because it'll come from you. And the other thing that we always tell candidates when we say these are the messages that seem to work, know when to stop talking. So I'm going to do that right now.
I think a little later we're going to talk about resources that are available to you, and one of the resources that we brought with us is a handout of a report that we just released a couple weeks ago called Abortion, Inc. The reason this is important is Darla and I were talking as we were getting ready for the panel. Most Americans have a positive viewpoint of Planned Parenthood, and that's why Marjorie's point is so important, is that we need to be training ourselves to speak outside the echo chamber. And people do think, you know, Planned Parenthood has, you know, they've got the best of Madison Avenue working for them in terms of marketing their own self-image of who they perceive themselves to be. So we're working very hard to educate people about the fact that Planned Parenthood is Abortion, Inc. They are an abortion business. And why that's important is that based on their most recent annual report that was released at the beginning of the year, we know that they get 1.26 million of your tax dollars every single day. Over the course of the Obama administration, they have taken in $3 billion tax dollars. So in addition to the fact that taxpayer funding of abortion is important, I'm here to tell you that in terms of the pro-life movement, strategically cutting off that spigot of money is essential, because we will only beat them when we start to, you know, follow the money. That's where we're going to beat them, is when, you know, as long as they can depend on over $1.26 million a day from the federal government, you know, that's a tough thing to go up against. So one last fact I'll throw at you in terms of the truth versus how they portray themselves. 40% of Planned Parenthood's budget comes from the American taxpayer, 40%. And 94% of their pregnancy-related services are abortion. So this whole idea that they are, you know, providing health care services to American women is an absolute crock. And I will end with my favorite statistic that our legal team found in going over the last 6 years of their annual reports is, at the same time that they are promoting themselves as these great advocates of American women's breast health, Cecile Richards has cut their cancer screenings by 50%. 50%, their cancer screenings. I'm a breast cancer survivor myself. I'm really deeply offended by the fact that Planned Parenthood holds themselves out as the solution to this terrible disease.
Okay.
The polling data quite backs up what was just said. For example, this was polling data that we took in a rather extensive study of Planned Parenthood that we did in 2013. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of Planned Parenthood? Very favorable, somewhat very favorable, 40%. Somewhat favorable, 23%. Somewhat unfavorable, 10%. Very unfavorable, 17%. For a total of 65% of the people have a favorable opinion of Planned Parenthood, and 27% have an unfavorable. So we got a big job. Mm-hmm. We have a tremendous job, and we've got to be careful about our rhetoric, since we come to them knowing that, and there must be pro-lifers in that too when we look at the statistics. When we come to them, we see we're up against this. Well, what can we do about it? Well, polling also shows that there is a way of approaching it. And for one thing, I would say about this is, let's, at this point in time, in this place, this is not a good thing to ask your candidates to do publicly, is say, oh, I'm opposed to Planned Parenthood, because you and us and everybody, we haven't yet convinced the public, and that's our job. We don't want to put the people who we are trying to elect on the line to do a job we should be doing. What might happen is they might not be elected because people already have prejudices against that point of view. So Lila Rose does a wonderful job that, if you know, she's directly exposing some of the things that Planned Parenthood is doing. But then we say, do you support or oppose using tax dollars to pay for abortion? 58% say they oppose and 35% say they support. You know, that's typical of a difference of opinion that we have anyway, but 58 is a good percentage.
And
So,
why don't we pick up on that, because you know, we've identified the problem here, obviously.
yeah, it's the rhetoric.
And
it's what we say, whether we directly use their name, Planned Parenthood, or we talk about what they do, then we have the public with them.
But go ahead, Charmaine, jump in on that.
Well, I don't. Maybe you have a particular place you want to go. One of the things
say what you're going to say, and then I can fill in.
I want us to keep coming back, and I wonder if this is where you're going, to the positive, because I do believe that we are winning and we are really gaining traction. Going back to my point about the yelping that's going on out there, one thing they're yelping about is that our messaging on abortion harms women, but Planned Parenthood is also yelping about clinics closing, and clinics are closing dramatically across this country. And what's really, really important for us as a movement to understand, and this ties into the positive perception that people have of Planned Parenthood, is the reason clinics are closing is because they refuse to provide decent services to women. They refuse to provide decent services to women. Tanya Reeves died in one of Planned Parenthood's flagship clinics in Chicago, right across the street from the Art Institute. This is not some scuzzy, you know, sleazy round-the-corner abortion clinic. It was one of the allegedly good ones from Planned Parenthood, and yet you're not seeing people paying attention to that. But that's what our job is to start helping people to understand that that's what the legal abortion industry looks like.
Yeah, and I want Marjorie to jump in on this. And I did want to shift to, you know, some people are aware of what's maybe going on in their state. They might be aware of some of what's going on the federal level. Mm-hmm. But I'd want Marjorie to take this first. We've had the successes of some clinics closing in some of the states, and that's been a result of the work in those state legislatures and such like that. You know, what on the state level has had the most impact that folks should be aware of? Maybe it's happening in another state that they don't live in, so they could model it after. And then what's happening here on the federal level that is having the most impact as we battle this industry?
Sure. You two will be better on the state level than I will, so I'm going to leave beyond the pain capable bill, but I'm sure y'all will speak to that as well. I'd like to actually address something that I think is important that's very related to this, the state and federal blend. States are, of course, our laboratories for legislation. It's where the best ideas are tested and proven, and then often there's a firestorm of states that copy their good ideas, which is exactly what we want. I think, especially at CPAC, where there are a lot of folks who think that only legislation should occur on the state level, there is an idea that we should not move the best legislation to the federal level, and that is dead wrong. There's certainly constitutional reasons that should be said, but let's just talk about the basic common sense. We're talking about the death of a human being. Talking about the death of a human being. Before any rights can flourish, before you can have a Second Amendment, before you can pay taxes, before you can sign up to defend our country, you have to live. So if our Constitution doesn't protect that, it protects no other right, and we all know that. When this nation has gotten to the point that our peers in abortion law are North Korea and China and Vietnam, when those are our humanitarian peers, then we ought to start looking at our federal law and what we actually stand for. We protect a child at no point on the federal level, and we claim to be the human rights democratic beacon of the world. The promises that our Constitution made to us and to our kids and to every generation are not being kept. So this fight on the federal level is key, and I believe the most important thing that happened began with National Right to Life's bill in Nebraska, the 20-week pain-capable bill that has passed in many states after. I believe it will pass in many more. It just passed in House and Senate in West Virginia, and we pray that the governor will sign it there. We think it'll pass in South Carolina and others. But it'll follow that zigzag path to success that the partial birth abortion ban did. And then the day after we've elected this president, so of course we better stay very focused on who that guy or girl is, the day that that person signs that bill will be the first day since Roe versus Wade that our country has taken a stand to protect any child during its gestation before it's born. We all know, let's hope we all know, that partial birth was important, focused on the baby finally, but it did not protect a child at any point of its life in the womb. It only protected it from a procedure. This is, I think, the most important moment in the pro-life movement since 1973. And we will see the spinning out of that in the next few years on the federal level, certainly on the state level. That has to continue. But on the federal level, with a national conversation going on, where we are on the offense, the bad guys are on the defense, we're peeling off their Democratic voters, their Hispanic voters, to come to our side. We're putting some Democrats in the Senate and some Democratic presidential candidates. They are putting their own candidates in a pretty tough spot. It's a pretty tough place that they're putting their guys in. Anyway, that will be the moment that we can say we have begun once again. I think we're there.
Okay. Charmaine, you want to jump in on some other parts of the states?
Well, what we're seeing at the state level is just this tremendous focus on kind of coming out of the Gosnell conviction. Let's just do a quick poll.
Yeah,
how many people know who Kermit Gosnell is? Okay, well, let's do it the other way around, if you don't mind. How many don't know? Oh, come on, really? Okay, there you go. That's
helpful.
It's very helpful, and actually, I don't mean to embarrass you. You actually probably, I think that those of you who don't know who Kermit Gosnell is represent more of your average man on the street American. Because the truth of the matter is that the left-wing media, the mainstream media, didn't cover the fact that Kermit Gosnell, who was a dirty abortionist in Philadelphia, was convicted of killing babies after they were born. The truth of the matter is there are other Kermit Gosnells out there, and the legal abortion industry in America today is the back alley. American women are not getting much better treatment from today's abortion industry than they did 40 years ago. So what we're seeing in terms of pro-life legislation is, in addition to the ban, which we also support, is an emphasis on taking a look at this abortion industry and the fact that they have been allowed to a large degree to operate with impunity and very little legislative and administrative oversight. Your manicurist has more regulation in most places in America today than your local abortionist. So part of the emphasis we're seeing are clinic regulations, admitting privileges laws, and some other things like this that look at the abortion Inc. as the industry that it is. And what is the result of this? In Texas, we're seeing abortion clinics close all over the state as a result of the omnibus bill that Texas passed. I guess, is it 2 years ago now? Mm-hmm. And we're seeing several other states that are now looking at doing the same kind of omnibus bill as they did in Texas, and I think this is a really exciting development that we are starting to develop momentum and have more of an awareness that we need to be looking at this industry for the abusive business that it is.
Darla, you have anything to add?
I wanted to comment that I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings when some of you have given such good news, but there's bad news about Planned Parenthood too. The bad news is that one of the reasons they've closed some of those places is not that they were so bad, but because they're building gigantic abortion clinics elsewhere, and you see them all across the country. And so that's becoming more and more of a terrible problem. They're wealthy. So that's the other reason we have a lot of trouble up against them in the rhetoric, because they can kind of define it with all their millions of dollars. Back to the various bills, that bill that was that Marjorie referred to in West Virginia that's going to the governor to be signed will not be signed, but they think they have override. That's the last thing I've just heard from Our PAC director, Karen Cross, is there lobbying from it because she came to us from West Virginia, and she called back and said they think they have override with the governor, which will mean we get another one in West Virginia. There's one
and real quick, for those that aren't familiar with West Virginia politics, this last election was the first time West Virginia has a Republican, conservative-controlled state legislature in nearly 80 years, right? It was like 68 for the one chamber and nearly 80 for the other. So they're doing some phenomenal things there. So I'm starting to give you an idea of how groundbreaking when people start talking about West Virginia in these last few days. So go ahead.
South Carolina, there's a paint-capable bill moving in South Carolina also. That's, I think, a big bill for all three of us here. It's a wonderful bill. And it was written by a woman originally. That's why we're quite proud of it. She has also written another bill now that we have it's been entered now in Michigan, and it's passed one house in both Oklahoma and Kansas. It's a bill that outlaws dismemberment of children, of unborn children. And there are some horrible descriptions of the way they reach in and jerk out arms and legs and various parts, crush the head, and they're just terrible. And when the American people hear that, has a tremendous educative value too. And so that's another bill. This bill, while it doesn't outlaw all abortion at a particular time, like the 20 weeks, like the pain-capable bill does, it does about 90% of the abortions between 16 and 22 weeks are done by this horrible dismemberment system, and it will really cause a problem to the abortionists to prevent them from using that lovely, terrible, I shouldn't even sarcastically say lovely. I should just say that terrible, tragic method. So it has tremendous educative value too, because as the pain did, because it gets people thinking about what is happening. Because as they debate the issue, they begin to think about abortion. I know after the partial birth abortion bill, the number of people who just plain supported abortion went down. The two other types of bills that are before legislatures are clinic regs. AUL has done a lot of work with clinic regs, for example. And then there's the outlawing webcam abortions, because once again, Planned Parenthood and the abortionists have this system that they think can spread abortion, where they have a doctor sit far away before a webcam, and because in places that require a doctor to participate in the abortion, they are trying to set it up so that the doctor can be miles away on a webcam saying, take this pill or whatever it is.
This was Iowa. You're talking about Iowa specifically.
Well, we're talking, there are webcam, there are laws against webcam abortions that we're pushing in a number of states.
Right.
Now, some of them have been enjoined, but some of them are not enjoined. And so that cuts back on spreading it out to the hinterlands so that there's a convenient abortion.
Sounds good. Okay, we're going to do now the fan favorite lightning round, which everybody seems to like here this week. I'm not Sean Hannity.
What is that?
Starting with Darla, what is the short answer, what is the #1 policy area that the activists in the room should be focused on when they go home?
Educating all the people you know around you about the abortion issue, about how terrible it is, and how they should always vote pro-life. They should find out what I'm getting in a lot.
Okay. All right, Charmaine.
Yeah.
If you remember nothing else that I say today, please remember that abortion harms women. 1 out of every 10 women who get an abortion have serious complications. 1 out of every 5 women of those women face complications that could be life-threatening. When we say that abortion harms women, we're not just talking about, oh, she's sad for a couple of days. There's a dramatically increased risk of suicide following abortion. It's a very, very serious threat to women, and we've got to start talking about that. The left has been extremely effective at creating a wedge between the pro-life movement and women by claiming for themselves the mantle of the defenders of women's health, and we need to take that back.
Marjorie?
Get involved in the presidential election now. And if it's not obvious what you can do now, there are 3 things. 1 is insist every primary candidate now and until the end of the primary stay very centered on communicating the issue well. Make sure that they're as strong as they have been at CPAC as they are in every single state, including New Hampshire. How do you do that? We can talk about that later. When we get to the general, find out how you can go door to door or phone call voters, and that's a question that I can help you answer too. This presidential election will either set us back or set us forward decades because of the results of the Supreme Court that will come from that. So that would be my best and heart's desire. And if you don't know how to do it, get a hold of us.
Well, and now what we're going to do, I'll come to you in a sec, buddy. Real quick, just hold on to that thought. Darla talked about education. One of the things, how many of you, just a quick show of hands, and no, don't mean to put anybody, how many of you are involved in the pro-life community back in your state? How many of you then, after listening to what's going on, are motivated to get involved when you go back home? Anybody new? Good.
All right, we'll keep on working.
We're going to keep working on you.
Dan, you better.
Yeah. I got a great story from where these two are from.
Oh, good.
But there's a ton of excellent resources out. We're only as good as our ability to educate, and Darla touched on it briefly. I'm going to give these 3 panelists a chance to do commercials on themselves, and let's keep it short because then we want to really move into the activism piece of this. We've already touched on it a little bit. But when you say conservative action starts here, as the theme of CPAC is, we've got to educate ourselves, which is why we're all spending time here, and we need to have the tools available. And so we'll start with Marjorie and work our way down. And we've put up their websites for you to jot down while you're up here and know where to go for some of these resources. So I'll give Marjorie her 2-minute commercial about what they do, as well as at the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and how you can go to their resources to educate yourselves and be better. And then after we get through your resources, the next question, just so you can start thinking about it, is how better that these people in this room can work with candidates so they talk about the issue better. So go ahead, Marjorie.
I'm going to put my advertisement in the form of a pitch because everything that I'm asking for right now, we have an ability to do something about because of the way we're organized and because we have a research institute that is backing up our claims no matter where we're making them. My pitch is that you do what I just said a minute ago. That is to get involved in the coming election from the top down and the bottom up. The top down means the candidates themselves doing whatever you can do, and there's a lot you can do, to communicate to them directly about how they ought to be how they ought to be communicating, where they ought to stand. We need confident, bold, articulate candidates moving into this election. Or think about yourself as a candidate. If you're thinking about yourself as a candidate, we have our training manual to help you do all those things that I just said about what a candidate ought to be. And then from the bottom up, really grassroots are the top. I mean, it's the most important thing. That is my strongest conviction about getting involved in elections, not because elections are awesome and fun. Politics is often, as we all know, a really hideous activity. But if we leave the field to those other guys, we will lose every single time. To me, the biggest lesson that we learned, that Susan B. Anthony has learned in this past election, is that returning to the human center of this project is everything. Person-to-person communication at their door, on the phone, the person of the child that we're looking at in the womb, the human being, the human center of this whole project is everything. And politics is nothing if it ain't the bare reality of humanity getting involved in trying to change the world. So everything that you want to do, you can do in the pro-life movement. Not only our organization, not going to claim that we're the only ones, but I will say it's our primary focus to be woman-centered, election-oriented. And why? We need a law passed, guys. Educating is great, but educating is nothing without a consequence. I mean, I really believe that's true. We have educated enough to pass way more than a 20-week bill, perhaps, but we're at least ready for that. I mean, it's the least we can do, honestly. If we're involved in the pro-life movement, we've got to get involved in this election. Please do it through SBA.
Charmaine?
One of the ways that we know we're winning is that pollsters tell us that your generation, this youth generation, is more pro-life than your parents were, more pro-life than mine. And gosh, that's exciting. We are winning. We are gaining momentum. And so I failed to tell you two resources that we have. This January, we had the great honor of releasing the 10th anniversary edition of Defending Life, which our detractors out there, I think Mother Jones or one of those illustrious publications, called it the Pro-Life Playbook. Every year we put out a thick book that looks at every single state individually to assess and analyze how pro-life they are. We then rank each of the states in something called the Life List from 1 to 50 to say how pro-life or how pro-not-so-life they are. And so I would encourage you, please, go to our website, aul.org, and take a look at how pro-life your state is. You may be surprised, or since you're pretty active in this room, you may not be. But for each state, we have a recommendation of how you can act in your state to increase the protection for human life, both for the baby and for their mothers. So I would really encourage you, please, to do that. And for more information about that, Mike is standing in the back of the room. Mike, you want to wave at everybody? He can help you get signed up for what we like to call Team Life. One of the great thrills of my life was standing on the stage at the March for Life this year and looking out across the thousands and thousands of young people. And this year we came out with beanies that have hashtag Team Life on them. If you want one of those, go talk to Mike. He can help you with that. And most of all, just thanks a lot. It's encouraging to see you guys here.
Great. Darla, there's a lot on National Right to Life's website. What's the one thing you want to brag about here today that as a resource for folks?
Well, the portal to all of our resources is our website. So if you go to our website, you'll see we also have a lot of policy papers and testimony and that sort of thing, but you have to go to our website. And then, of course, most of you know we have the chapters in communities across the country. We have chapters and we have state affiliates. So you can join us that way too. But I want to also make an appeal for everybody here. One of the things that we all need is funding. So funding helps. Or if you know somebody that you might be able to encourage to fund our organizations. We are so much poorer than Planned Parenthood. When you heard about the billions of dollars, and we're up against a giant. So anything you can do, or maybe a few years from now you may have some money. Think of the pro-life movement. It's a great investment in life.
Great. We've only got 5 more minutes left. Won't hold you any longer. There's no test. But we'll want to be able to take a couple questions as well. But before we have a chance to do 2 quick questions from the audience maybe, what's the last piece of wisdom? Marjorie, you already talked about the presidential campaign. Anything else to add to that? One last piece of wisdom dealing with elected officials, or as we look at the presidential campaign and how important it is, just give that one, if each of you could just give your one last piece of wisdom for the activists.
Mine is we should be in this room together the NRA of the pro-life movement. It's one of my special happy things is that NARAL called us that one time long ago, so I always get to repeat it, that we are the NRA of the pro-life movement. If we think that the Second Amendment is worth protecting, if we think our tax rate is something we must fight for, and then there must be consequences for people who don't fight in those areas, why would we not have the same attitude towards the people who are supposed to be voting to protect our unborn children? Why would we not? When they do well, let's praise them, help them. When they do poorly, let's make sure the private sector is what their next job is, the arena of their next job. We have to take ourselves seriously enough and our ideas enough that we are the, let's just call it what Susan B. Anthony List calls it, the velvet hammer of the pro-life movement. You know.
Charmaine, one last thought before we open it up.
Well, I have with me here today my 11-year-old son, James. James, wave at everybody. James is a quarterback, and one thing that I've learned being the mother of a football player is that so much of life is 30 yards in a cloud of dust. You know, it's always pretty exciting when, you know, you see those long bombs that go down the field, but honestly, how do you win a football game? You just dig it out, man, and you move that ball yard by yard by yard. Shoot, if we didn't learn that from this last Super Bowl, I don't know that you'd ever learn it, right? One yard can make all the difference in the world. And my point of this is that I absolutely love the title of this panel. When I was invited to speak on baby steps, how the pro-life movement is winning, I was really excited because, you know, that's what it's all about, is be encouraged, guys, because we are making a difference. We are marching down the field. And the other side is, I had somebody tell me the other day who has reason to know that the other side is more scared of us than we are of them. And so be of good cheer.
Well said. Darla, one last thought.
Well, I was trying to think of something I hadn't already said. And the perfect is sometimes the enemy of the good. That is sometimes people will say that we can't vote for a piece of legislation or we can't vote for a candidate because they're not perfect enough. And of course we want to get the most perfect legislation and the most perfect candidates we can. But if we cannot find perfection, we've got to settle for the good. And National Right to Life has always been known as an increment, and sometimes people say this as though we're compromisers because we believe in going step by step by step. And we believe that if you can't get everything, don't settle for nothing in order to hold out for the perfect, because you probably never will get it. Take that step, and then take another step. And we don't think the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act is the end-all and the be-all. It is a step. It saves some babies. And then that builds momentum to save more babies. We don't think some of our candidates are the best, but we're building momentum by getting better and better candidates.
Great. Well, thank you all. Why don't we take, you had a question? Why don't you, yeah. So
there are several young folks in here, including myself, that attended university, most likely at a liberal arts school. And academia has shut out the topic of abortion. They don't want you to do speeches on it, they don't want you to write papers on it, they kind of act like it doesn't exist. So in your opinion, do you think that helps or harms the cause? Because most professors are liberal, so they could give you, they kind of blocked out both sides, which they don't do. So do you think that helps or hurts, and why?
I would say, oh, go ahead. No. It hurts. However, grassroots again, what I see on college campuses now is that the voice of the students is so powerful and strong. I mean, in places that you wouldn't even expect it, that is, in the places where it's really hurting, we're just going to say it's hurting. However, those kids, those young adults who are really making their voices heard are the heroes on those campuses.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to go up against orthodoxy. The good news is that, you know, doing the great social justice movement of each generation is the province of the young, right? You guys are the ones who advance truth and justice, and what I find exciting about being a part of this movement is we're on the side of truth, and so I am never ever concerned when I get in front of a microphone or when I have a chance to talk. I never have to really kind of ponder, what we're going to say, because it's like we're on the side of truth, and truth is going to find its way to the light. And so on your college campuses, steal from their playbook the Socratic method. Force the argument back on them and ask them to defend themselves. You don't even have to be confrontational about it. Just what I find in talking to people, even people who ostensibly disagree with us, is that the more you talk to them, they actually agree with us. They just haven't figured it out yet themselves, and they're not willing to admit it. So many of the people who describe themselves on college campuses as pro-choice are actually pro-life, and they just don't understand that yet. So ask them to talk about their own experiences. Why are you pro-choice? Do you know anybody who's had an abortion? Since there's all these cameras going, I guess I won't tell all the experiences that my own children have had on college campuses, but the truth of the matter is, the more you talk to real people who've had experience with abortion, the more the devastation is real.
We'll do one more right here in the front.
I just want to emphasize that sometimes one tiny action can bloom out into a wonderful result. 10 years ago, I was a graduate student at Yale University in Divinity School. There was no pro-life organization that had died. I made one phone call, another phone call, another phone call, just trying to find one other person that might want to go to the March for Life. I found an undergrad. Together we founded Choose Life at Yale, which is now huge.
Yay!
And I found an undergraduate because that's where the funding comes from, undergraduate activities, the activities fee that every parent pays. And now they're
That helps smoke out the faculty that actually is pro-life and is afraid.
What was amazing was once there were just 2 of us to start, and she said to me, "It's got to be undergraduate." I thought I was founding a graduate organization, and I said, "Fine, that's what one is." And then people came out of the woodwork who were waiting for someone else to speak up at Yale.
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
One last question in the back, and then afterwards, and then I know there's some media in the room. The panelists and myself will talk to the media afterwards, but let's do one last guest question in the back.
How will you all hold Rep. Elmer's accountable for what happened?
Let me tell you my view on that. Right now, we're at a crucial place where we got to get this. I'm sorry, Darla. You could go ahead.
No, she was asking what the question was.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't hear the question.
Renee Elmers, yeah. We're at a crucial place, and I am not inclined to, right now, I think is a moment where we just got to get the bill voted on the floor of the House. That's my perspective right now. She will always have made the mistake that she did, and we'll see what happens later.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you, and thank you to the panelists.